He saw my face and wanted me. He saw my spine and feared me. Most women change themselves to keep a man. I refused. What happened next destroyed his ego, rebuilt my soul, and taught me the most painful lesson about love that no one warns you about. If you've ever been punished for being too strong, too sure, or too much, stay until the end. Hit that like button now because this story was buried inside me for years. Subscribe because I'm just getting started. Before Dorian, my life was quiet in the most honest way. Not empty, just still. Like a lake early in the morning before the wind picks up. I had built that stillness deliberately, brick by brick, with my own two hands. I grew up in a house where money was always tight and love was always complicated. Where I learned very early that if you wanted something done right, you did it yourself. Nobody was coming to rescue me, nobody was going to hand me anything. So I stopped waiting and started building. By the time I was 31, I was a landscape architect with my own small firm, a woman who could look at an empty patch of concrete and see a garden. I designed outdoor spaces for a living, parks, courtyards, rooftop terraces. Places where strangers would one day sit and breathe and feel at peace without ever knowing my name. There was something deeply satisfying about that, about creating beauty that outlasted you, about leaving something good behind in the world even when the world hadn't always been good to you. My apartment overlooked the water. I had a cat named Fig. I cooked on Sunday mornings and read on Sunday evenings and called my mother every Thursday night, even when she frustrated me, because she was still my mother and life was still short. From the outside, it looked like everything. And mostly, it felt like everything too. But there were nights, and I will be honest with you, because that is the only way this story means anything. There were nights when the stillness felt less like peace and more like loneliness wearing a very convincing disguise. Nights when I would sit by the window with a glass of wine and watch the lights reflecting on the water and feel this quiet ache somewhere deep behind my ribs. Not desperation, not bitterness, just a soft, persistent wish for someone to share it with. Someone who would sit beside me in that silence and make it feel like company instead of absence. I wasn't looking for Dorian. I want you to understand that. I wasn't desperate, wasn't searching, wasn't showing up to parties hoping to be found. I was simply living my life, fully, carefully, contentedly, when he walked into it on an ordinary Thursday evening at an outdoor dinner on my friend Nora's back porch. And the moment he looked at me across that table, something shifted. Not inside my heart, not yet, but somewhere in the air between us, like the world had quietly rearranged itself without asking my permission. I remember thinking he had kind eyes. I remember thinking he smiled like someone who had never had to try very hard at anything. I remember thinking almost against my own will. This one is different. I was right, but not in the way I hoped. He was different in the worst possible way, and it would take me 2 years to fully understand that. Dorian courted me the way a person reads a beautiful book. Slowly, deliberately, like he wanted to memorize every page. He called every single day, not with grand declarations, but with small, tender questions. How did the site visit go? Did you eat lunch today? What are you thinking about right now? He sent handwritten notes, actual pen on an actual paper, tucked into my mailbox on random Tuesday mornings. He showed up once at my project site with 2 coffees and said nothing except, "I just wanted to see you for 5 minutes." Then he left, just like that. I had never been pursued like that before. Quietly, consistently, like I was worth the patience. And the compliments, God, the compliments. He told me I was beautiful the way other people state facts, like it was simply true and he was simply reporting it. "You are the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." He said it so often and so naturally that I stopped hearing it as flattery and started hearing it as something closer to devotion. But Nora heard something different. One evening, after the 3 of us had dinner together, she pulled me aside in the kitchen and said something I chose not to listen to. She said, "He talks about how you look more than who you are." I laughed it off. I told her she was being protective, that she always did this with the men I dated, that Dorian was different. She looked at me for a long moment and then nodded slowly, the way people nod when they already know how a story ends, but love you too much to say it out loud. I wish I had listened. I wish I had held her words up to the light and examined them carefully. Instead of folding them up and tucking them away somewhere, I wouldn't have to look at them. Because 6 months in, something began to shift. It was so gradual, so impossibly subtle, that I genuinely did not see it happening in real time. It started with suggestions. My outfit for a dinner party. Maybe something softer, less structured. My tone in a conversation with his friends. You don't have to be so direct. It makes people uncomfortable. My weekend plans. Do you really need to go into the office again? Each comment, on its own, sounded like caring. Wrapped in a gentle voice, delivered with a soft smile, they felt almost like love. But looking back now, I understand what they actually were. They were measurements. He was quietly, carefully taking measurements, finding out how much of me he could move before I noticed, testing the edges of my boundaries the way you test ice before you step on it. And the most heartbreaking part? I let him because I was in love. Because love makes you generous in ways that fear never could. Because I wanted so badly to believe that the man who called me beautiful every single day actually saw me. He didn't. He only saw the parts of me that were easy to hold. The rest of me, the fierce, uncompromising, deeply rooted rest of me, that was the part that would eventually terrify him, and I had absolutely no idea what was coming. The waterfront project was the biggest thing I had ever built. 18 months of work, hundreds of decisions, countless early mornings and late nights where I sat alone at my drafting table with cold coffee and burning ice, pouring every single piece of myself into something I believed in completely. It was more than a park. It was a conversation between the city and the sea. Stone pathways that curved like sentences, garden beds arranged like punctuation, benches placed exactly where the light fell softest in the late afternoon. I had thought of everything. I had given everything. The night of the opening ceremony, the mayor shook my hand in front of the entire city. My name was engraved on a small bronze plaque near the entrance. People applauded. My team cried. I stood at that podium with the ocean breeze behind me and the crowd in front of me and felt for one perfect and complete moment, like every hard thing I had ever survived had been worth it. Dorian was not there. His excuse was thin. Something about being tired, something about the drive being too far, something I could tell he had put very little effort into constructing. I stood in that moment that should have been the happiest of my professional life. And underneath the applause and the congratulations and the flashbulbs, there was this hollow, aching awareness that the person who was supposed to be proudest of me had chosen not to come. I drove home alone. I told myself it was fine. I told myself he would make it up to me. I told myself the same things I had been telling myself for months, the gentle, patient lies that people in love tell themselves to avoid seeing what is directly in front of them. He was on the couch when I walked in, shoes still on, television on low. He looked up at me with an expression I can only describe as deliberately unbothered, and then he said in a voice as flat and cold as pavement, "Congrats, you got what you wanted." 5 words, said like an accusation. Something inside me went very, very quiet. I sat down across from him and I asked him calmly what he meant. And that was the night the mask finally completely came off. Because Dorian looked at me, this man who had once driven across town just to see my face for 5 minutes, and he said the most honest thing he had ever said to me. He said, "I fell for you because you were beautiful, but you turned into someone I can't compete with." He said he wanted someone who needed him, someone who looked to him for answers, someone whose world he could stand at the center of. And I was none of those things. I sat with those words for a long time in the silence of that room. And then, very quietly, I asked him to leave. He waited for me to take it back. I did not. The first week after Dorian left, I did not cry. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect heartbreak to arrive immediately, loudly, like a storm breaking through a window. But mine came slowly, the way water seeps through a crack in a wall, quietly, persistently, until one morning you wake up and the whole foundation is wet. That morning came on a Wednesday. 11 days after he walked out, I was standing in my kitchen making toast, doing something so ordinary, so completely unremarkable, and without any warning at all, I just broke. Not dramatically. I didn't collapse or scream or throw anything. I simply stood there at my kitchen counter with my hands pressed flat against the cold marble and cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was a little girl who still believed someone would come and make hard things easier. I cried for the relationship. I cried for the version of myself who had dimmed her own light trying to keep his ego warm. But mostly, I cried for the time. For the 2 years I had handed to someone who had spent them quietly trying to make me less. Nora came that evening without being asked. She didn't deliver a speech. She didn't say, "I told you so," even though she had every right to. She simply showed up at my door with soup and silence and sat beside me on the couch until I fell asleep. That kind of love, the kind that doesn't need to explain itself, that is the kind that actually holds you together when everything else is falling apart. For 3 weeks, I let myself grieve completely. I think that is important to say out loud because so many women are taught to rush past their own pain, to perform recovery before it is real, to post something strong on the internet while they are still bleeding privately. I refused to do that. I gave myself the full weight of what I was feeling without apology and without a timeline. And then, one morning, a rainy, gray, unremarkable morning, something shifted. I woke up before the alarm, made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the rain move across the water in slow silver sheets. And somewhere in that stillness, I heard something. Not a voice, not a revelation, just a quiet, steady, internal knowing that whispered, "You are still here. You are still whole." He did not take anything that actually belonged to him. I went back to work that week, not to prove anything to anyone, not to show the world I was fine, but because my work was the place where I had always been most completely myself. And I needed to remember what that felt like, to stand inside my own strength without apologizing for the space it took up. Slowly, carefully, the way a garden grows after a long winter, I began to come back to myself. And this time I came back knowing exactly what I would never again give anyone permission to touch. There is a particular kind of peace that only comes after surviving, something that was designed to break it. Not happiness exactly, something quieter than that, something with more weight to it. The kind of peace that sits in the chest solid, permanent, earned. I found that peace slowly, the way you find it putting on an even day. One careful step at a time, one honest morning. Months passed. The city embraced the waterfront park in a way that still makes my throat tighten when I think about it. Families gathered there on Sunday afternoons. Old men played chess on the stone tables I had placed beside the eastern garden. Children ran along the curved pathways I had drawn by hand at 2 a.m. on nights when I was too tired to think but too passionate to stop. Strangers sat on those benches in the exact spots where the late afternoon light fell softest, just as I had planned, without knowing that the woman who put that bench in that precise location had cried herself to sleep the night she designed it. I walked through that park alone sometimes, and every time I did, I felt something Dorian never could have given me. The deep, unshakable satisfaction of a woman who built something real with her own hands and her own vision, and her own refusal to quit. Then one evening, Nora called. She told me carefully and with great gentleness that Dorian's new relationship had ended. That the woman he had chosen, being quiet, agreeable, endlessly accommodating, had eventually grown tired of being kept deliberately small. That she had left him the way people leave situations that slowly suffocate them, quietly at first, and then all at once. I sat with that information for a long time without speaking. I won't pretend it didn't sting initially. There is a particular cruelty in hearing that someone moved on easily, even when you already know they were never right for you. But the sting faded quickly, and what replaced it was something I did not expect. A profound and genuine sense of relief. Not because he had suffered, but because the pattern had revealed itself completely. Because the truth had finished telling itself without any help from me. A week later, a message arrived from Dorian. Short, Careful, honest in the way that people are only honest when it costs them something. He said he thought he had destroyed the best thing he had ever had because he was afraid of it. He said he was sorry. He said he hoped I was well. I read it twice. I set my phone face down on the table, and I never replied. Not out of cruelty, not out of bitterness, but because some endings don't require a response. Some silences are the most complete and powerful sentences a woman can speak. I looked out at the water that evening and I thought about everything I had been through. Every moment he had tried to shrink me. Every night I had questioned myself. Every morning I had chosen to come back to who I was anyway. And I felt rising slowly through my chest like the sun coming up over the sea. Completely, quietly, permanently, myself. And this time, nothing in the world was ever going to change that. If any part of Celeste's story felt familiar, if you have ever loved someone who confused your strength for a threat, who wanted your beauty but feared your backbone, then I need you to know something important. You are not too much. You were simply too real for someone who only wanted a reflection. Drop one word in the comments right now that describes how this story made you feel. Just one word. I will read every single one of them. If this video moved you, please like it. Not for the algorithm, for every woman who has ever been punished for refusing to disappear. Share it with someone who needs to hear that her strength is not the problem. It never was. And if you are new here, please subscribe. Because I have more stories like this one, stories that were buried, silenced, and swallowed whole. And I am bringing them all to the surface one by one, for every person who was never given the words to explain what happened to them. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know.